For many years, the purveyors of the New World Order had tirelessly sought to unleash a global government on the world. One which would be controlled by a world leader under the headship of Lucifer. Fueled by this all-consuming demonic compulsion, they deployed various hideous eugenistic plots, including major devilish schemes at depopulating the world, to foment this sinister agenda. And then came 2020. In retrospect, the year 2020 leaps out, in the chronicles of time, as one when the greatest fraud ever concocted by man, was let loose on a gullible world. A constructively created virus, COVID-19.
This virus doesn't discriminate. It attacks everyone.
This is truly an unprecedented situation.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
There is no American that is immune.
It's the biggest fraud that's been done for a very long time. It's all about eugenics. It's all about the reduction of population around the world. This is the best opportunity they have had since the beginning of their ideas.
In essence, every intricate piece of this deceptive puzzle was masterfully fabricated.
There's more than enough evidence now that it was a deception from the beginning. Go back to 2020.
On the dawn of the year 2020, the eugenicists who had for so long sought to control the world, spun and released a humongous deception on the world. This time, their deceptive tool of choice was a virus. This virus was carefully fabricated and let loose on the world by the perpetrators and collaborators at play, according to the timing on their playbook, although the world was deceived for a long time with various false narratives about the actual origins of this virus, ranging from stories about the lab leak theory to its origins from the Wuhan animal market.
Where do you think COVID came from?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we don't know. And I think that's where a lot of the accusations and confusion about who says what. We don't know the definitive answer to that. It is much, much more likely that this was a natural evolution from an animal reservoir, likely to a bat to another intermediate host, to a human.
A joint investigation by the World Health Organization and China backed the possibility of an animal origin.
The findings suggest that the laboratory incident hypothesis is extremely unlikely.
However, the man of God Pastor Chris, from the outset, debunked the spurious claims about the true origins of viruses, the COVID virus not being an exception.
Viruses don't exist in nature. You see the problem? They don't exist in nature. Most people have never known it. They are not living things. Anything that doesn't exist in nature is man-made. Period. That's the fact. That's the truth. Is man-made. Where do viruses come from? They don't exist in nature. If they don't exist in nature, they're created by somebody. It came out of a lab. There were those who said, why, Pastor Grace? How can Pastor Grace say that? I said, tell me, where do viruses come from? But later on, you found out that's exactly what happened. That's what happened. And I said China was a scapegoat. That's what I said. Because they didn't produce it. Somebody else produced it. Took it to China. Released it from China. This was planned in the lab. Of course, with their collaborators. Maybe actually, like I said before, it was the Chinese that were collaborators, even though it happened in China. The perpetrators were from the United States.
The lab leak theory of COVID-19's origins gained tremendous legitimacy this week as the Wall Street Journal confirmed independent reports from friends of the show, Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, that the earliest outbreak occurred at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in November 2019. Patient zero are now presumed to be 3 Chinese scientists, at least one of whom, Ben Hu, worked extensively on gain-of-function research, the manipulation of viruses to make them more dangerous, which was funded by grants from the U.S. federal government. Those cases occurred in November 2019, well before the Hunan wet market outbreak favored by some in the scientific community as the more likely origin story, and they occurred among the very people one would most suspect in the event of a lab accident. This is quite damning, to say the least.
$3.7 million flowed from the National Institutes of Health here in the U.S. to the Wuhan lab in China, the same lab where many people have said that this coronavirus infection first originated. We also now know that NIAID, the department associated with the National Institutes of Health, of which Dr. Anthony Fauci is in control, had already been conducting experiments with the Wuhan lab in the past in regard to coronavirus.
I chaired a commission for The Lancet for 2 years on COVID. I'm pretty convinced it came out of U.S. lab biotechnology, not out of nature. Just to mention, after 2 years of intensive work on this. So it's a blunder of biotech, not an accident of a natural spillover.
When I said that the viruses didn't come from nature, they wanted to do their best to get me silenced. It's just that, silencing me is impossible,
Sadly, while the world shivered under the blanket of fear and deception triggered by the lies, the leaders of nations fully caught in the puppet strings of the deep state blindly enforced several draconian and unscientific laws in their nations.
There was no science in the advice given to nations. There was no science. There was no data. And the steps that the nations were asked to take were not tested scientifically. They were never tested. This is real. There was no scientific proof that the recommendations of lockdown, mask, and the social distancing worked for COVID-19.
You must stay at home.
A 14-day quarantine will be mandatory.
Spain and France have now joined Italy in banning people from leaving their homes.
You absolutely must stay at home.
All gatherings are canceled until further notice. This means no weddings, in-person services, or even parties.
Closed schools, empty auditorium, canceled events.
Game tonight has been postponed.
The NBA suspending the rest of its season.
And the NHL has decided to suspend its 2019-20 season.
So listen to the advice of experts. Stay home.
It's a setup. Listen, the lockdown is the most unscientific way to deal with viruses. There's nothing more bizarre and unscientific than this.
There is no scientific justification for quarantining healthy persons. It will not stop a respiratory viral illness. That's well established. What concerns me is that we actually have laws that say you cannot quarantine the healthy. Specifically, in my home state of California, this question of quarantining the healthy has been asked and answered. In 1905, when bubonic plague was a concern, the Department of Public Health attempted to quarantine the healthy. There's a landmark ruling, plaintiff named Jew Ho, Jewho. This took place in the San Francisco Chinatown area when the bubonic plague had kind of swept in that area. So the Department of Public Health, much like it's doing today, back then tried to restrict the activities of healthy persons, and they set out a 10 or 15 block by 15 block area where they said people who lived in that area couldn't have freedom for travel and assembly and work. Just that area. That went to the California Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said absolutely not. You cannot quarantine a 15 by 15 block area of persons who are healthy. That's totally against the law. Jew Ho is still the law of the land in California. It's just one example of the fact that we've never quarantined healthy persons. We have no legal right to quarantine healthy persons. And from a scientific perspective, it's well known that quarantining healthy persons is totally irrelevant and unhelpful in stopping the spread of a viral respiratory illness.
The lockdown was wrong. In most instances, illegal. They were called lockdowns. When you lock down a street. But when you lock people in their houses, it's called lockup. The truth of the matter is, around the world, we were imprisoned.
Well, before COVID-19, you would never put a healthy person in quarantine. Before COVID-19, a whole lot of things would never have happened. And so for the first time ever, healthy people were told to stay at home. And not only was it a violation of everybody's constitutional rights, it turned out to be a terrible idea for health.
Just as the man of God decried the unfounded farce that were the horrendous lockdowns, he also exposed two other implausible COVID protocols, which were the mask mandates and social distancing rules, for their irreparable damage to human health.
The other issue is the one about the masks. I've never seen something so embarrassing to science. As far as science is concerned, wearing of the mask is not science.
However, the perpetrators of the scamdemic doubled down on their efforts and still enforced these sinister mandates. As in the following examples.
I can say as a public health official that I would urge the leaders, the local political and other leaders in states and cities and towns to be as forceful as possible in getting your citizenry to wear masks. Masks are important as part of the physical distance. Physical distancing is the most important.
So if you have a physical covering with one layer, you put another layer on, it just makes common sense that it likely would be more effective. And that's the reason why you see people either double masking or doing a version of an N95.
Every governor should mandate mandatory mask wearing.
It is therefore important that we should enforce the wearing of masks.
Authorities there to issue a mask mandate in Paris and its suburbs.
Yeah, I just don't think of wearing a mask as such a deep inconvenience. I mean, we ask people to wear pants. Why was this politicized? Early stage of the infection, we thought this was about coughing. We didn't know the simple masks would provide so much benefit.
Wear masks, wear masks, wear masks. I've been asking myself, could those who are instructing this be really ignorant? Or are they conspiring to kill? Because I can understand how anybody would ignore the reality of the danger. It's either the willfully ignorant or conspirators to kill. I find no sensible middle ground. Wearing a mask for several hours. How can a scientist not know that that is self-poisoning by CO2? Because the amount of carbon dioxide that you are exhaling from you cannot go out as fast. So you're trapping it within the mask and taking most of it back into you. This is elementary science. You cannot use a mask for long without poisoning your own system.
The viral particles that we're trying to keep out of our bodies are so much smaller than the smallest pore of these masks.
This is a carbon dioxide detection meter. Okay, let's have a look. It's beeping, which means it's telling it it's at a dangerous level. And that's what the signal's saying inside my mask. So, actually, by having the mask on, it looks like you're virtually just killing yourself.
The reality is, the perpetrators of the COVID scam were by no means ignorant of the harmful effects of these health-damaging COVID protocols. In fact, they deceived many through speeches backed by so-called, well-researched findings.
Some of the disturbing things in our world today are these very prescriptions that came to the different nations that never did any research, none of them, And don't listen to these guys who tell you research has shown. We have found out they've been lying. They've been lying for so long. They don't have any research.
Just as the man of God Pastor Chris exposed these baseless guidelines backed by no research, in the early days of the pandemic, such as the mask and social distancing mandates, the days, weeks, months and years that have followed, have witnessed these same individuals deny any scientific grounds for these gruesome mandates they once imposed on the world.
Overseas now, and Dr. Anthony Fauci has admitted there were no clinical trials to back up the recommended 6 feet distancing guidelines during the COVID-19 pandemic. The former head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases has fronted Congress for the first time since he retired from public office, where he was grilled on the origins of COVID-19.
The man who became the face of America's coronavirus response has become one of the country's most divisive figures. For the first time since he left his job as the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci fronted Congress for a grilling. Dr. Fauci admitted that the social distancing guidelines to stay 6 feet apart had no scientific basis.
I said that it is not based in science and it just appeared. It actually came from the CDC. The CDC was responsible for those kinds of guidelines for schools, not me. So when I said that it just appeared, it appeared. Was there any science behind it? What I meant by no science behind it is that there wasn't a controlled trial that said compare 6 foot with 3 feet with 10 feet. So there wasn't that scientific evaluation of it.
I don't remember talking about masks at all, but the two of you personally were using masks.
Yeah.
I remember you seemed like a really extreme case because you would wear the full thing when you leave your apartment, and it was like, is he gone overboard? Is he germphobic?
I was doing, yeah.
In the face of this laughable hypocrisy by the perpetrators of the COVID deception, it bears emphasizing what the scriptures say, that evildoers will not go unpunished. And sure enough, these workers of evil are already being made to face the repercussion of their actions at the hands of the law.
Mr. Fauci, you were quoted on CBS Face the Nation saying it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci?
I am a scientist who uses the scientific method to gain information.
Yes, you said you represent science. Do you represent science, Mr. Fauci? Yes
Again,
or no? Yes or no?
No, that's not a yes or no answer.
Yes, it's a yes or no.
I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we'll take that as a you don't know what you represent. This was a time in history where you got to throw out the first pitch at the Washington Nationals baseball game while Americans were forced to stay home and watch such events that they love from at home alone on their televisions. And what a hypocrisy this picture shows. Here you are without your mask, with empty seats everywhere. Remember the cardboard cutout fans? That was one of the most insulting things to Americans, having to watch the games from home where you got to go and enjoy the game and sit right next to people not following the 6 feet of distancing, not wearing your mask, and everyone else was forced to stay home and stop enjoying life. And your science here, your science is displayed perfectly in this picture where children in school were put in plastic bubbles because of your science, your repulsive, evil science. And let's go back to your very own email. You said earlier you don't use email. Oh, you do. Right here. This is your own email where you said the typical mask you buy in the drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus. I do not recommend that you wear a mask. This is your email. This is your own words. But yet children all over America were forced to wear masks. Healthy children forced to wear masks, muzzled in their schools. And then they were forced to learn from home because of your so-called science and your medical suggestions while you and all your cronies get paid from Big Pharma. You know that what this committee should be doing? We should be recommending you to be prosecuted. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci.
So they created the crisis and decided to prefer solutions in a very sly way.
The crowning missile in the artillery of the perpetrators of this fake pandemic was the vaccines. A false solution they sought to enforce on the world long before the outbreak of the COVID virus.
This vaccine has been ready since. So they're just telling you it's hard. They're working hard every way so they can come up with it. They're working hard. It'll take 18 months before it's ready. Then we go, oh. Then they say, we're going to try. In 10 months, we will try. Then you say, please do. Then finally, they say, it appears we might even have a record time, 6 months. Then we say, that would be a miracle. Then in 3 months, it's ready. They say, you know what? We found the fastest. In fact, it was new technology. With new technology, we got it.
We didn't know anything about this in December. We were starting to get rumblings. China said there was some sort of an outbreak on December 31st. But Dr. Baric signs a government deal with Moderna. I want to read it exactly to you. This deal was made. It's confidential. It's 158 pages long. It is, if I skip to page 104, they are entering a specific private confidential agreement. The NIH appears to be transferring technology to Dr. Baric, but what they're making clear is, quote, mRNA coronavirus vaccine candidates developed and jointly owned by NIAID and Moderna. Now, this is weird because it's 2 weeks later that we know there's a problem. They signed that deal 2 weeks before, and they signed it with the doctor who happened to be a partner with the Bat Lady in Wuhan. Here's where it gets really dark. These are the same group of people that in the end of January begin to have meetings and they shut down and begin to smear anyone who's looking into the lab leak theory. They establish that's not true. Don't even look there. It appears to be collusion. We've passed this on to several people in Congress and the Senate. We know Rand Paul is on this, and Dr. Fauci has some answers to give.
They submitted a clinical trial that started in January 14th, 2020. I asked yesterday the representative of Pfizer and she declined to answer. How is it possible that we, the world, found out in December of 2019 that there is a COVID, or coronavirus as it's called, in China, December of 2019. On January the 11th, the Chinese government released the DNA data, or a segment of it, to the public, and 3 days later, Pfizer already started the tests for this vaccine. How is that possible? She did not answer. In the case of Moderna, and I've asked the CEO of Moderna 2-3 weeks ago when he was here, they submitted trials since 2017. So I'm restating the question, how is it possible that when we found out in the fall of December, winter of 2019 about this virus, they submitted tests of their vaccines years before we found out about the virus? And I'm still asking that question now. How is that possible?
So, with the solution already pre-planned, their next line of action was to begin to influence the nations to make vaccination mandatory. Several leaders of nations came out to debunk it, but the man of God, in the usual spirit of a headship, broke the news of their deception before it got into public domain.
The nefarious plan was to come up with a vaccine and compel the nations of the world to take the vaccine. It was denied by many, including many leaders. They said they would never force anyone. There will be no such mandates.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand to be mandatory.
Mandate vaccines across the country. No, that's not a role that the federal government, I think, even has the power to make.
We cannot require someone to be vaccinated. That's just not what we can do. It is a matter of privacy to know who is or who isn't.
No, definitely not. You don't want to mandate and try and force anyone to take a vaccine. We've never done that. We don't want to be mandating from the federal government to the general population. It would be unenforceable and not appropriate.
A few weeks into it, they did it. They mandated it just as I told you.
I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated.
I took some time to study about vaccines. You'll be surprised. There's never really been a scientific proof. Never been an independent, fully reliable proof. Forget about what they taught you in school. They made you read some things. They just told you. You never did a research. Take the time to do a research. I did. No proof. No scientific proof. It was the vaccines that worked when they were claimed to have worked. There's actually more proof of harms from vaccines.
The former pilot and realtor developed a rare neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome after receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine in April of 2021.
These vaccines have been a hoax from the beginning. So all those steps that were taken were not necessary at all. They destroyed the nations for nothing. They destroyed the nations for nothing. And why? Because of the demon spirits that were motivating these things, inspiring these things, instigating this evil. The wickedness was too much. The real pandemic was the wickedness of the heart of man. My brothers and sisters in Christ, God's word was given to us to warn us, to instruct us. It says for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness.
The face of the Lord is against them that do evil, to cut off the remembrance of them from the earth.